Welcome to SilviCast, the podcast about all things silviculture. My name is Brad Hutnick.
And I'm Greg Edge.
And we're both silviculturists with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and your host for today's show. Greg, I have a real treat for you today, my friend. I'm going to expand your palate and have you taste some of these fine bourbons that I purchased at the gas station across the street.
Gas station? Must I?
It's Spring Green. We have quality is all around you in Spring Green. Now,
it all burns the same to me, Brad.
No. Now, you need to really appreciate the complex nature of a fine bourbon. Okay, let's try this one.
It seems that I must.
No. This is not some wild wine tasting, Greg. Now, don't swirl it around all place and up in the air like some kind of milkshake.
Okay.
Slowly bring it to your nose and breathe in the flavors. Ooh, so that's good. Now, let's see. I get like a toasted oak with a hint of a earthy leather. But what do you smell?
Vicks Vapor Rub.
Now, be serious. Now, okay. Well, anyways, try tasting it. Now, let's slowly, just a little sip here. Now, what do you get?
Oh, yeah, Brad. I can smell something. The flavors are, let's see, it's sweet and buttery. I know, Schnecken.
Schnecken?
Oh, yeah, Schnecken. They're those German cinnamon rolls my mom used to make.
I give up trying to culture you, Greg. But in any event, did you know that each bourbon must be stored in a new charred white oak barrel and aged to infuse these complex flavors and colors? It's just one of the many things that make white oak such an interesting and important tree species. So today on SilviCast, we'll be talking with Jeff Stringer, professor and chair of the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky, about all things white oak, including the White Oak Initiative, a diverse coalition of partners from across eastern and central United States dedicated to the long-term sustainability of America's white oak forests.
Now I see where you're going with this. And it'll be great to visit with Jeff Stringer again. Maybe we can try the gas station whiskey on him.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Since 1940, foresters across North America have relied on Nelson Paint for tree marking solutions. Nelson Paint manufactures paint designed to withstand the harshest weather conditions in the field and Nelspot tree marking guns that last the test of time. Visit nelsonpaint.com to learn more about their products.
And now back to our show. Jeff Stringer, welcome to SilviCast. It's good to see you again.
That's great to be here.
Hey, before we get started, would you tell our audience a little bit about where you work and what you do, Jeff?
So I'm chairman of the University of Kentucky Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. I've been in that administrative position for about 6 years now. Prior to that, I was an extension hardwood silviculture and forest operations specialist here in Kentucky. I'm a tree physiologist by training, which doesn't help you much on a logging operation. And so I've done a lot of work on high quality timber production and the operations, and getting that out of the woods. Involved with a number of different species, and white oak happens to be one of them that we have a lot of in our state. It's commercially important. We produce a lot of it. And of course, then we've done a lot of silviculture and operations research associated with it, and technology and science delivery, technology transfer.
Jeff, you mentioned that you started as a tree physiologist. So what got you into thinking about trees or forests in general?
Well, it's my family farms, and so we've always been involved with growing things. And being down here in the South, growing trees is a big deal. And so I thought, well, the family can grow corn and soybeans, I can grow trees. And so my interest in forestry really came about because of that. We have a lot of students here, as probably are in a lot of other schools, that become interested in forestry because of being outdoors and that kind of thing, and being able to hang out in the woods. I came at it from the standpoint of wanting to grow trees. So I didn't start out trying to grow white oak trees, but that's what it eventually morphed into.
We've had a lot of guests that have originated on the farm.
Yep.
I think that was Patrick Brose said he got his fire interest because part of his farm burned.
Yeah. Yep. Maybe that's what we have to do, Greg, as a part of forest management. We have to start early, like a farm system, literally, where we have to send kids to a farm before they can go into forestry. Dum-dum.
Yeah. Good one, Brad.
And this is kind of, Jeff, this is a little bit of old home days for both of us because we both met you through the NAS program. So we were both at the Robinson Forest with you doing the tours, doing things. And I always remember we were there, we were looking at some of the water quality things, and there was an active timber sale nearby, and we went up to it. And I just remember that you had a really good interaction with loggers too. Like you could talk to them. Sometimes you talk to people in academia and loggers might not get along, but I thought you were really unique that way.
Well, I think part of it is, being an extension for as long as I have been, and probably having, we were talking about coming from the farm, right? So you were coming from, a family and an overall environment that was very hands-on, right? And I think the loggers appreciate that. Yeah, I'm director of the Kentucky Master Logger Program, which is a state required program. All operations have to have a trained master logger in site. So I've had a hand in training all loggers in Kentucky since 1992. So I've been around a lot of loggers.
Yeah. I just remember you gave us explicit instructions to not call you Dr. Stringer in front of the loggers.
Yes, that we don't want it. I have very little credibility as it is. Calling me a doctor would pretty much shoot it right there.
I thought that was great.
Yeah, no, I love the time we spent on the Robinson Forest, because just looking at what you guys were doing for some of your management, and for me, it was a good contrast to what we had seen in Kentucky and some other places. So I thought it was really, really good.
Well, I think it's interesting to get around and see silviculture being done in different places, right?
Yep.
We talk a little bit about mention white oak, and white oak, if you look at the range of it, basically it's all over the eastern US, right? So growing in the Appalachian Mountains, you got it growing in the Ozarks, which are, significantly different, right? You got it in lake states and northern Alabama. So it's a species that, because of its geographic spread, right? There's a lot of different things you could do, and there's a lot of interesting things that silviculturally you can do with it and need to do with it, just based on the competitors that you have, right? The suite of competitors that you have in the different places and site qualities and all that kind of thing. So it's interesting as a species. It's interesting from that standpoint.
Yeah. Are there states east of the Mississippi that don't have white oak?
No, it's pretty much it. I mean, if you look at the range of it, it's, I'm sure Maine's got 3 or 4 trees in it, right? So they've got some, but no, it's got a huge range. Now, the bulk of it, when you talk about what we call what I call the sourcing area, right? So that's that middle central hardwoods, right from the Ozarks all the way over straight east to the Appalachians, right? And up through the middle Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, not to leave Michigan out or Wisconsin or anybody, right? And then down to the northern tier of northern Alabama, northern Mississippi, northern Georgia. That's where the bulk of it comes from. That's probably 60-70% of the supply, if you look at volume, and that's where most of the growing stock is at as well. Having said that, right, it's in lake states, right? And, you've got woodland owners up there that have white oak present in it. And if you got white oak present in your woods, it means something, especially now, because it's a seller's market for white oak. Red oak's gone down the toilet, so to speak, and we can we're old enough that most of us anyhow can remember where, red oak was outpacing white oak.
Oh yeah, sure.
And we lost the price support on red oak with the Asian market. That was what was holding it up. And, but since then, white oak's really dominated. And when you get to a little bit higher quality stuff, and the veneer, the stave logs for making barrels out of, we can't have any knots in it and stuff. So, it's commanding a pretty good price and will be for some time. So I think it's going to be a seller's market for white oak, for quite a while, not forever, but for quite a while, which is a good thing if you got it.
Jeff, can you say something to sort of the status of the white oak resource? Sort of what are the long-term trends with it?
Yeah, so white oak is, we got a lot of growing stock out there, right? You got, tens of millions of acres of, where white oak is, prevalent, is important in the overstory, right? You have very few monoculture stands. I mean, that happens every once in a while, right? But where it's important, part of the system And so we've got a lot of that. And if you look broadly speaking, so if you look at the age class distribution, right, most of our white oak forests region wide are running in that 70 to 80 year range right now. Okay. So from the standpoint, even though white oak doesn't grow fast, you're talking about what, 16, 18, 20-inch trees, right? So there's a lot of volume standing out there right now. So we don't have a supply issue in the short term. However, if you start looking at medium and higher quality sites throughout the range, okay, so particularly east of the Mississippi River, okay, there on those higher quality. So think in terms of upland oak site index, of 70 and up. So you're having really hard time regenerating white oak. So you may have 20, 30, 40% even of the basal area in white oak, dominant, codominant white oaks, right? So in the overstory. And those kind of stands on higher quality site are having a hard time regenerating, right? You can get seedlings on the ground from the acorn production, but there's so much shade on the ground that those seedlings that you have a trouble with recruitment, right? So you get the initial 1 foot tall seedlings, but you can't grow them into 3, 4, 5 foot tall and eventually sapling and that kind of thing. And particularly in areas where you've got yellow poplar as a competitor, because on the higher quality sites, yellow poplar will just outpace it. I mean, it'll outpace northern red oak, right? On the right site. So white oak, where even though it's present now on those site index 70 and up sites, you have a really hard time regenerating it with traditional regeneration methods. Okay. And the reason that is, of course, that shade on the ground is coming from mesification. So that's where you have your understories of red maple, sugar maple, American beech, those kind of things that are shade tolerant are coming in underneath the overstory. And that's creating the significant shade on the ground, which is stopping the recruitment of the oaks. Now that applies to northern red oak too, for example, right. On higher quality sites.
Yeah. So very similar story sounds like to a lot of the upland oak species. You got that big even-aged bubble that's sitting at 70, 80 years old, but not much coming in behind it except on those lower site index sites.
Exactly.
And we've
known about this. So, this issue with maintaining the upland oaks, we've known about this for a long time. I mean, we were talking about this back in the 80s, right? Or before.
Right.
And we all understand why past history, but so we don't, Smokey Bear comes along, right? And we're not grazing hogs in the woods and all those kind of factors that are high disturbance, right? Factors that oaks love. And you stop doing all that, which all of us would say is probably a pretty good thing, right? But that's what's led to the mesification. There we go. So, we've got normal bio. A lot of people ask the question, is harvesting the problem? That's not it doesn't help it, but that's not what's causing our problem. What's causing our problem is normal biological, function, right? Is the mesification. That's just normal biology, and the woods is trying to adjust back to before we disturbed it so much. And we're going to see the loss of the oak in the system. And of course, oak, particularly white oak, right, is one of the most palatable acorns we have, right? White oak certainly more palatable for wildlife than red oak. So it's a great hard mass species. The Wild Turkey Federation can get behind it. Okay. Neotropical migrant people can get behind it, right? For nesting and those kind of things. So it's a species that has a lot of interest in from different groups and different uses, right? To try to keep it in the system if we can. So it's one of those good species that that the industrial side of things can get behind, right? So whether it's veneer or lumber or barrels, those kind of things, pallets, what everybody can get behind it, and so could the wildlife contingent and landowners that are interested in wildlife and those kind of things. So it's a great species to kind of rally support for as far as management goes.
So if I'm hearing you right, so it sounds like our disturbance has changed, right? Like our disturbance regime, maybe historically we had that fire and now we don't have it, but we're still harvesting, we're still doing things. Are there other things that are contributing? I think of like our experience here in the Lake States, we might look at some sites and see invasive species can adding to that mesification. Do you guys have problems with that as well?
Well, it does happen in places, right? So the invasive, I mean, who doesn't have some type of invasive species? And so, but it's not generally, I don't think, I mean, of all the issues we have, I'm less worried. And I think we have, from white oak in particular, we have less worry on invasive species. Okay. And I can't, you know, nothing's an absolute, of course, right? You know, but the majority of our problem is that natural mesification issue. Okay. More so than we have to worry about tree of heaven or something, you know, whatever might occur. We have bush honeysuckle, you know, in parts of Kentucky, that's a real problem, but not in the white oak area so much. So, yeah, I think invasives, we don't have a fern problem, for example, and that kind of thing through a lot of the range. Now that everybody in Pennsylvania that listens to this go, what are you talking about, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and we don't have a particularly large browse problem necessarily for natural regen, right? So I think it's more of a just general natural native mesification issue, okay? That is the culprit here for white oak.
You think high grading's playing a role too? I mean, as far as that mesification, kind of taking out overstory, releasing what's underneath it?
Yeah, it could. It could be. I mean, you know, high grading forever. High grading is not bad if you got plenty of acceptable growing stock coming behind, right? So, you know, but it's when you don't, and that's our problem, because you can't. Now, white oak's kind of unique, and one reason we haven't had as much problem with what in thinking about, you know, we're talking about our upland oaks and having trouble regenerating them. We've known it for a while, and a lot of that interest initially when we started finding it out was something like northern red oak, right? That was sustaining a lot of value at the time. You know, we were trying to pull it through on higher quality sites, which has the ability to grow on, and we couldn't do it. You know, and so I think with white oak though, it's got some shade tolerance, and that's where it differs. So if you think about the spectrum of shade tolerance, right, we're the ones that put a classification system, right? But it's a continuum, okay? And so white oak is about the most shade tolerant oak that we have, okay? So that helps you a little bit, because now it'll stand up and, you know, hang in there as an intermediate crown class tree for quite some time. You know, where northern red oak might fade out after 30 years, you know, as an intermediate crown class or an overtop crown class tree, right? Because the shade tolerance, white oak will hang in there for a while. And initial, so if you think about it, if you have the pole size class in a woods, and you're selectively, if you ask the loggers, what are you doing? I'm selectively harvesting, right? So they're high grading, right? Or diameter limit cutting. As long as you can keep enough of that going on and have that pole size white oak in there that still has physiological vigor to it, see, white oak will help perpetuate itself in that environment. Now, eventually, though, it's going to quit. I mean, it's going to get to a point where it gets 80 years old, it gets flat top, it's physiologically, you know, shot, you know, right, and just because it's been suppressed for a long time. So a little bit of canopy disturbance, as long as you've got that pole size white oak that has the ability to respond physiologically, right, it can withstand that some, right? Now, we don't want to run out there and say, oh, Stringer said high grading's fine and everything. No, that's not what I said. But white oak has kept itself going a little bit because of that.
Yeah, I know our foresters play more to that little bit of shade tolerance, and also a little bit of less browse preferred than red oak. And so sometimes those little tweaks work to its advantage.
Yeah, and you can. And so what we're finding out, and we've done a lot of research on mid-story removal, oak shelter wood, those kind of things, right, to try to help white oak or upland oaks and white oak too. And what and now that I'm at the end of my career, I have what I think is some reasonable thoughts about a few things, right? So you've seen a lot of growing seasons go by and watched a lot of things happen and seen a lot of failures, right? Including some stuff we do in research. I'm pretty convinced that because of that shade, so oaks are intermediate shade tolerance, period, right? okay? And most of our silvicultural systems, and I think most foresters that have thought about this very, very long have figured this out, right? We have a very simplistic way of thinking about silviculture here in the US, okay? And one of the reasons we do is because when things started, when Schenck come along, right, and they were developing the first forestry schools in the US, we didn't know anything. So they had to simplify it, right? Make it simple for us stupid Americans, right? And so, and we had this even age, uneven age thought process going on. And we had things like when you have an intermediate practice, you don't worry about regeneration, right? All you're worrying about is cultivating, the trees that are out there in the overstory, whatever, crop tree release, all those kind of things, thinnings and that kind of thing. And we don't think about regeneration till it's time to do a regeneration harvest. Well, I think with oaks, I think that thought is screwing us up. And I think with white oak is the same way. I think we have to start thinking about regeneration, which is a process, not an event. That's a common saying now that's been used for quite some time. And we have to start building that regeneration, that advanced regeneration pool, well before we're thinking about a regeneration harvest. And we've got some research going on now where we're going, okay, we've got basically we did a clear cut, let's say, we got a 20-year-old regenerating stand, and the white oaks are getting, are getting beat out by the red oaks and the yellow poplar and this and that and the other thing. And we're doing research now to hold some of that white oak in place so you don't lose it at 20 years into the rotation, right? Because once you lose that advanced regeneration of pole material, sapling, and the advanced regeneration of the small saplings and stuff, trying to get them back is really hard. So we're thinking now, do we actually start to build silvicultural systems that keep that smaller size white oak around, for regenerational purposes later on, stump sprouting or whatever it might be. And we maintain vigor. It's not an uneven age system, because that's outside of group selection. That won't work. We know that, but maybe we got to do a hybrid, because you are dealing with an intermediate shade tolerant group of species in case of the oaks, a genera, right? That has to and requires advanced regeneration before regeneration harvest or event. And that's just different, right? And we don't think enough about that. And I think the simplicity of our silvicultural systems now, and think of uneven, even age, all those practices you do that fit it nicely into those two containers, I think is what's causing us a problem with the oaks.
So does that mean that, Jeff, that thinking about that shade tolerance and maybe getting a little bit more of a complex system, that maybe these systems are going to look more like irregular types of shelterwood systems?
Yeah, they could be. They could be. And the main thing is you got to control. See, the growing the oak is not the problem, it's the competitors, right? That's the problem. If you do all away with all the competitors, we grow oak all day long, right? That just makes sense.
Right.
So the issue is the competition and getting the competition controlled. And that's where, you mentioned Patrick Brose, right? So when he was at Clemson, he did that, his PhD research was looking at, a yellow poplar, white oak mixed stand when it was young, right? They burn it. And of course, the white oak doesn't have any root because it's putting all the carbon in the top, right? So when you burn it, it's smoke. And the oaks have a fair amount of carbohydrate they put in a root system, right? Conservative growth development, right? And the oak sprouted back and it all kind of worked. Well, first of all, you can never burn like that because you can't figure out. Doing the burn at the right time and those kind of things is really hard to do, right? But there was something to it, because what happened is if you take that competitor out, the oak's fine, right? So think about mesification. We have forests down here that have both sugar and red maple and American beech, and we don't have a heavy American beech like you get into, like the Alleghenies, like West Virginia, and the Appalachians, where you got reagent grade beech, right? So it gets really tough.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of red maple, and it's all the same, and so can we get rid of this? Because what fire did, landscape level burning over long periods of time, it took those thin barked, right, species that are now causing mesification, right, our maples and the beech, and it moved them out of the system. Well, now they've all come back. And that's why you can't use fire to fix it. Because if you burn a five-inch red maple, you just made it mad, right? So it's gonna sprout back. It's gonna put all the leaf area down at the ground level, which is the last place you want it, right? Before you burnt in that stand, that leaf area for that maple was up there 30 or 40 foot off the ground. Now you took all that leaf area, stuck it next to the ground with the sprouts, right? So a simple burn won't do it. Now repeated burns, so landscape level management, like you can do on a national forest, right? So now you're thinking, let's 200 years, let's do a burn every 5 years forever, right? You know, that might work in oak's favor and probably will, okay? Especially you can get the timing right and the interval right and all that kind of stuff. We've done some of that work here. But for most private landowners, you got 50 acres or 30 acres, you got a stand that's 70. You're not going to be burning like that. It's too blunt of a tool, right? But if you can get rid of the competitors, that's what you use herbicide for, and those big perennial root systems, you might be able to use fire, right, as a maintenance kind of tool, right? And that's the kind of stuff we got to get. That's what we got to get figured out, right?
It is interesting though that is a really big change because, Greg, I know as a young forester, we would walk into stands, we might see a little bit of oak mixed into it, and we would go 70 years old, we're managing this to 120, it's whatever it is, don't worry about it. We don't need it. We're going to deal with that when we get to rotation. And this is kind of a little bit of a sea change, like, oh, wait, you need to be thinking about regeneration throughout the rotation, basically, or at least much longer period of time than simply 20 years at the end of that rotation.
Yeah, and where I started the first work in 2004 on mid-story removal, right? Now, you know, David Loftus was working, and I don't know whether many people have heard his name up in your neck of the woods, but he was a project leader with the U.S. Forest Service, silviculturalist, out of Asheville, North Carolina. So he's dealing with northern red oak, right? And trying to keep northern red oak running on high quality sites, and where yellow poplar is a major competitor. And he started to delve into this mid-story removal where, you know, that overtopped and intermediate crown class shade tolerant species were what was causing the shade problem on the ground, right? So you remove those and all of a sudden your oak seedlings start to respond well, okay? Well, we started work on that in 2004 here with white oak, right? And you got to get out in front of a regen harvest or removing the top, whether it's a clear cut or a shelter wood or a irregular set, doesn't matter, right? So you're increasing that light and allowing that age class, that young age class, to get moving. We're 15 years out. We found out you got to get those white oak seedlings who don't grow fast, to get them up 3, 4, 5 foot tall, man, it takes a while, right? And so I always thought that, okay, we could, if we got out there far enough in front of a regeneration event to develop that advanced regeneration, we're good. And I still think that. But I also think that if you've got white oak in a stand, like I say, when it's younger, you don't want to let it get away from you and have to rebuild it, right? And so, forestry was not meant to be, and especially in our hardwood stands and mixed species stands like we've got them in the eastern U.S., a silviculturist got to be pretty smart. And I think we don't allow ourselves to think out of the box enough right now. I think we're too programmed coming out of school, right? And our textbooks, we don't follow the same model that they do it in Germany back in the day, right? Where you have forest meisters and people coming up underneath them and mentoring and all that stuff. You give me a textbook, 4 years, man, you're a forester, SAF accredited, go out there and do something. Really? So how's that working? So, and so I don't think we let ourselves be open enough and thinking enough out of the box to say, okay, we've got a species here, in this case, white oak, right? And we know the characteristics, the growth characteristics of that thing, right? And a forester should be smart enough to assess the woods and analyze the woods and say, okay, this is the competitor situation we have here, right? And this is what's going to happen over time. And feel free enough to start enacting some silviculture plans. I don't know how you pay for some of it with NRCS. We can figure out, there's got to be some way, EQIP, there's got to be, for a stand improvement, you could probably get almost everything we need done. But there might be some stuff that needs to be done in these individual stands that that's outside of the box a little bit, right? And is off the book.
Yeah.
And we can't be scared to do that. And I think we are, generally speaking.
Well, I think it's been kind of an evolution over my career where I think we're thinking a bit more about the silvics of the species. And as you said, Jeff, assessing these stands a little more carefully. And I know, at least at NASP, because we didn't do it up here, the importance of that mid-story removal and removal of that lower shade layer and stuff. So we're doing more of that now. So hopefully foresters are thinking creatively and about these different improvements as we go along here.
Well, I think we need to. And one of the problems we got in that mid-story removal business, so unless you got a really robust hardwood pulp market, right, you're hurting. I mean, I've seen stands where you could commercially remove the mid-story, where you could generate 25 tons per acre, if you have the right machinery, you have the good market and that kind of thing, where you could do it commercially, but man, that's few and far between. Now we're relying upon government dollar to make it all work. And I think that's hard to do, for lots of different reasons.
Yeah. And that's the case here too, where the southern part of the state, we're looking at cost sharing to do that non-commercially. I guess we have the advantage in northern Wisconsin. If we're working in those situations, we got commercial markets.
Yeah. And Greg, our friend John Wendorski, Clark County, you guys are in the sweet spot because they have decent oak and they still have the markets for removing that mid-story, so they can work with that.
But generally speaking, and you guys know this, the white paper market is, is really deteriorated. And we've seen a bunch of mill closures in the northern tier of that sourcing area. So like northern Alabama and that area, we've lost mills in our area. So there's a lot of places where, you're not putting a new pulp mill in, right? And so all you can do is kind of maintain yourself and go downhill. And with the loss of the white paper market, commodity paper market, it's hurt our ability to do silviculture for some things, for sure.
Jeff, with all of this in mind, this is where we kind of started the conversation, was about this big collaborative effort called the White Oak Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit, what is the White Oak Initiative?
So the White Oak Initiative, all it is right now is a collaboration. It's a bunch of stakeholders coming together, recognizing we've got an issue that we're a lot of different entities, that are interested in conservation of white oak. Ultimately, the industry is worried about sustainability and availability, right, at a price point. Okay. Conservation groups are worried about it from the different attributes that white oak provides and the wildlifers and that kind of thing. So all the White Oak Initiative is a bunch of stakeholders that have come together to say, hey, we can work together on this issue of white oak sustainability and start doing things that can help out. It's very unique in that regards. It's probably going to turn into a 501c3, but right now it's just a bunch of people getting together, right, and talking about white oak conservation. What happened was, for those foresters that are listening that are in extension, all it was my attempt to get information, right? Get information in front of the stakeholders on where white oak was at, the issues that it was pinching. We got plenty now, but we got stuff coming that's going to be problematic, right? And I simply did a bunch of messaging on that, workshops and those kind of things, got everybody in a room, and at one point, back in 2017 in the spring, I said at one of these big meetings we had, we had distillers there, right? Think about it from forestry. We never have anybody on our side, right? So we finally got the distillers, right? Who make a product that kind of people are into right now, interested in forest management. Like that never happens, right? So, so we had that, and I had Tom Martin, who was president of American Forest Foundation, AFF, right? So that's a tree farm guy. Came to one of those meetings just talking about who owns the white oak, right? Just giving information. to some of the industry that didn't realize that you and I own all the white oak, right? And so and he saw the interest we had and the different stakeholders that were there, and a lot of people were in. Because at that 2017 meeting, I said, we've had a couple of these meetings every year. Let's get together and start doing something. Let's form a partnership, or let's get everybody's email address and start sharing stuff, and let's try to do something. And the bottom line is, Tom and I did some airport meetings after that, and we came up with the idea of doing a White Oak Initiative, because Tom was really impressed with the fact that we had a commercial interest.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Longleaf Initiative, right? There's not a commercial interest there. That's all conservation. We have the Shortleaf Initiative, the same way. Red cockaded woodpeckers love it. Other than that, industry doesn't care that much, because my southern pine brethren are all loblolly, right?
Yeah.
About it. But here in White Oak, man, you had everybody interested, right? And so we got one of the distillers, Brown-Forman. So Brown-Forman is Jack, for those who don't know, it's Jack Daniel's whiskey.
Okay.
And Old Forester. Okay. Bourbon. And so they had started sponsoring. We had been talking, because that's in my backyard here, and they had become interested and started hearing about this. They actually they were the only distiller that was vertically integrated. It means they made their own barrels. They bought a cooperage, they bought a couple of stave mills, right? So other than that, the distillers were just buying barrels, right? So they understood this wood thing, and wood supply and sustainability and everything. So the three of us, AFF, myself at the University of Kentucky, and Brown-Forman, got together 23 geographically spread and stakeholder spread individuals to come together in the fall of 2017 and form the White Oak Initiative, and it's been rolling ever since. The industry has put money in it, and they're up there lobbying for more forestry stuff in the Farm Bill, right? So that's a good thing. Whoever does that, nobody ever does that, right? So we finally got people that are lobbying for that. Been supporting a lot of, we've got a lot of LSR, landscape scale restoration. State guys would know what that is, right? So that's money from state and private going into projects. And we got LSR projects for White Oak, both in Region 9 and Region 8. And they're both basically the same thing, doing this, not the same thing. We're not duplicating effort, but we're combining effort, right? To work on educational products for, we got landowners for oaks, series out, we're doing training stuff for foresters, logger education stuff, all that kind of stuff, to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing when it comes to managing white oak, right? From a technical standpoint, and providing information that the foresters can use to tell landowners, oh, this is, it's important for oak to have advanced regeneration. And why is that? And how that works, right? Those kind of things. And here's the different practices that can be done to manage oak. So we're producing all those kind of things right now. So it's just a collaborative of a bunch of stakeholders, geographically spread and interest spread to try to help this species out. And of course, and you guys know this, all foresters, if you're helping white oak, you're also helping whatever else oak you got there, right?
Today's episode of SilviCast is also brought to you by...
Looking for heavy-duty construction and forestry equipment? Check out McCoy Construction and Forestry, your John Deere dealer. With 16 dealerships spanning the Midwest, McCoy offers new or used construction and forestry equipment, rental, parts and service, and product support. Visit McCoyCF.com and follow them on social media to see what McCoy has to offer. The Family Forest Carbon Program pays landowners to improve the health of their land and increase the long-term value of their property. The program equips landowners with resources and support to implement sustainable practices that help them reach their goals while also improving the health of their forests and our planet. To learn more about how you can access these benefits for your forests, visit familyforestcarbon.org.
And now back to our show. Jeff, you're working with landowners, you're working with professionals. Is there also research being supported by this collaborative?
Yeah, so the collaborative itself doesn't dole any money out, at least not right now, except for lobbying efforts in DC, okay? But what it does do is support, it'll sign off on and give letters of support to researchers, right, that are submitting grants and that kind of thing. And so, and it's done, we've hosted, the White Oak Initiative hosted a couple of meetings of scientists to get together and just what are we doing on white oak,
Right.
right? And that
Right.
kind of thing. So it's helped foster collaboration.
Yeah, and I know we've been involved in the white oak progeny tests with Laura DeWalt, so that's kind of a wider offshoot.
That's a good example. See, because all that white oak work wouldn't have been going on without this, right? That energy.
Right.
Now that white oak, So the white oak genetic and tree improvement project, it's a big one. I mean, it's the biggest. I mean, we can't think of anyone bigger. Now the Southern Pine guys got some big, genetic tree improvement projects. Yeah. Same thing in spruce fir territory, right? You do, but as far as hardwoods goes, this is a big one. I mean, we have over 400 sources of white oak throughout the range planted in a master progeny test here in Kentucky. And we got 21, which is what you're referring to, like regional progeny tests, right? Where that same progeny is being located in different states around, ultimately to be culled and used as seed orchards. So you've got at least locally adapted acorns, right? That you can use at the nurseries then to produce locally adapted white oak seedlings, right? We're not going to plant our way out of this sustainability issue with white oak. You're talking tens of millions of acres white, right? You're not going to plant your way out of it, right?
Yeah.
But you can do things like enhancement planting, right? You can do establishment of plantation, those kind of things. But like particularly enhancement planting, if you had good genotype, right, to match sites and stuff, you could think about doing that. And God forbid we get the emerald ash borer going, the white oak borer going, and we have a problem. Yeah, I know.
Don't say it.
I know.
Don't say it.
Everybody asks me all the time, so no, we're okay now, gypsy moth, we'll be all right. But I mean, you could always have that, and you guys know this. If you wait till you have a problem like that to start looking at your genetics, you're done. I mean, you just can't handle it. And we had private industry is supporting this genetic tree improvements, and they also supported running the genome. So we have the genome for white oak now. We did that started that last year, and they gave us enough money in it where you can not only run the sequences, but you can start lining things up, who's on what chromosome, see? So we've got this great genomics work going on, right? Combine that with the genetics and tree improvement stuff. And now we're building a platform, right, of knowledge that we can put to use, right, for different things. Okay. And so I think that's a good thing,
And I think that's all flowing out of, so you started the White Oak Initiative, you brought this pool of stakeholders together. And then I really enjoyed reading through the assessment and conservation plan that you guys developed, because it basically took what are the concerns, but then maybe tried to paint that way forward with that conservation plan, which seems like it's a really important step.
Clearly you need a lot. You need to get a lot, right? And so
well, that's a given. That's a given.
So no, but yeah. So, but one of the things we did in the White Oak Initiative helped do, and this was part of the LSR grants, is we needed to do an assessment of the white oak condition across the range, right? Where we know where we got the forest, that's FI, so that's simple, right? And so we know where we've got the forest and where the importance values and where the basal area is at in the growing stock, right? And now what areas are regenerating well? Where do we have, advanced regeneration? Where don't we have, right? So that starts to show up, okay, this is areas where we're likely to have problems with the regeneration, right? And so you started mapping all those different elements, right? Which is what you were talking about, Brad, and it starts to give you a roadmap of, hey, here's where we need to be concentrating our effort. I'll give you a great example. Like in the central part of the range, I mean, I would not suggest anybody to try to grow white oak on site index 80. You just can't, it's too good of a site. There's too many competitors. You're just not going to be able to do it. I mean, if you could, that'd be great. And you got white oak there now, but trying to grow it there is going to be really, really hard. So let's find the areas where we got that, site index 55, like the Ozarks, there's areas there you may not have to worry about it because it's taking care of itself. So let's find out where we can reasonably grow it. Silviculturally, we got a shot at making it work, right? Let's define those areas. Let's make sure we got equip money there and make sure we got foresters there that know what they're doing, right? Make sure that loggers are aware if it's a thing, right? So loggers are there to extract timber, not to do timber management, right? And it's up to landowners and all that to do the right thing. But at least make loggers aware of how oak forests work, because they don't. a lot of them. There's a size age thing that they have trouble with, and I understand why, right? And then let's start giving them build the materials to let the landowners know this is what it takes to manage oaks.
One of the things in that plan was kind of some particular practices on where to concentrate to develop and sustain white oak. And I know Brad, and probably all three of us are about the right generation, big fan of David Letterman's top 10. So I think, Brad, you kind of wanted to do that,
So here we go. Yeah. So and this is basically, these were the prioritization or opportunities for practice that were included in here. So we'll just pick your brain, Jeff, on these as we go through here. So here we go. Tonight's category is white oak practices to sustain it from the home office in Lexington, Kentucky. So and I don't know if these are in order, so you can tell us if they're in order or not, but number 10, this was under moderate or selective opportunity level practices, prescribed fire.
Prescribed fire, the issue, the problem with prescribed fire, as we talked about before, it's a blunt instrument, right? And I'm able to take an herbicide prescription, and if things work reasonably right, I can tell you within 90% of what's going to happen there, right? I mean, but fire is a blunt instrument, and the way we talk about fire, and particularly as it relates to white oak, it's more involved with a site prep, right, than it is that long-term repetitive burning, because we haven't worked that out yet, right? And so, but this would be a situation where you could use it, you got a shelter wood and burn situation, right? Or a site prep using prescribed fire. And that's the way we talk about it there, because until we work out the prescribed fire long-term as a single tool, okay, it's interval, right? Because if you burn every year, you'll kill every seedling you got over time, right? So you have to let the oak build up, right, and then burn. So we've got some work to do to figure out prescribed fire as a neat tool, and everybody wants to burn. It's the thing of the wildlife people love it. They'll be lighting everything up before it's over with, in our neck of the woods if you let them. But it is a blunt instrument, and we don't know that prescription, how to use it quite right. So I put it, as far as all the practices we have, right, it's ranked pretty low as far as, what we're going to be able, how we're going to, the acres that we're actually going to be able to use it on, right?
And you did say with the moderate or selective opportunity level practices, that these can effectively establish seedlings, but are costly and are best used in combination with the other practices. So that's a good point. So number 9, scarification. So
scarification is one of the practices that is probably, of all the practices we've got, when you say scarification, most foresters go like, what are you talking about, right? So that's the one that they haven't heard about. And it has been used, there's probably only been 3 or 4 studies that I know of that have really gone after it and tried it out. But every time we try it, it works, okay? Now, the problem is it's a little bit costly. So scarification is simply on flat ground. You could envision a small farm tractor and a small disc being run through the woods right after acorn fall, right? And you drive it through the woods like a squirrel and run through there, right? So you're dodging trees, just run around. But the idea is that you're incorporating those acorns down in the mineral soil, giving them that direct mineral soil contact. And when you do that, you will increase seedling numbers. Okay, you're going to crash some, you're going to crack some, all that. But when that acorn is sitting in that duff layer, and the red oaks, right? So they're gonna, the white oaks will put that radical out right away in the fall. Okay, and if it's sitting up there in that duff layer, it's that acorn is subject to desiccation. Okay. And it's subject to predation, not just from turkey and, deer, okay, but from insects that have to do with beetles and everything else. If you get that thing down in the dirt, so a squirrel buries a nut, right? That's what we're doing here. And so the disc buries a nut, gets it down in the mineral soil, and all of a sudden it's protected from desiccation. It's protected from some of those insects, not all of them, but some of them. And because of all that, you'll get more seedlings per acre. And we did this research in Eastern Kentucky where it's straight up and down. I mean, we got, if you got a 20% slope, it's nothing, right? So we got 35, 45, 55% slope. And we took a rake on a dozer. We put it on our dozer. It's a D6 size dozer, right? And put a brush rake on it and did the same thing with a brush rake. And we had the same result, right? So that's scarification, right? And it only works when you have a bumper crop. So you got to get a lot of acorns on the ground, right? And do it then, okay? So again, it's one of those practices that will work for you if you've got the right conditions, right? It's gentle enough terrain, right? You get that bumper crop, right? And then being able to do that will help you out with seedling number, okay?
We have a number of public land managers using scarification with dozer blades, rakes, or salmon blades, and maybe we should do a little more formal research, get that out there more widely.
It's been done in Pennsylvania, Southern Illinois. We've done it in Kentucky, and they've done it down in Auburn as well. It's all on bottomland hardwoods.
Bruce Blair at the Yellow River State Forest in Iowa had done some really successfully too.
And again, it's a practice like burning everything. Wildlife guys love it. If they can run stuff through the woods and they can tear stuff up and whatever, they love it. So you can sell them pretty easy.
So number 8, underplanting or enrichment or enhancement planting.
Yeah, so that's pretty traditional, right? And we've always talked about that and done it a little bit. And you can underplant. So you can underplant like to increase like you would trying to build advanced regeneration, right? So you can underplant and do that. Okay. Now there's issues with deer browse. I mean, you got to worry about all those kind of things, right? And you can enhancement plant as well. Now, when you enhancement plant, you're going to have good quality seedlings, and you're going to have to be able to control competition around them, right? So the idea with instead of trying to put 100 seedlings out there per acre, you're trying to put 10 out there and make it work, right? And that's usually associated with a regeneration treatment. So that we've had success doing that, but it's one of those costly practices, man. And at times it's going to fail. I mean, that's a rough but you're planting seedlings out there in a forest. That's a rough environment, right? And so it can be done, but you have to have really good quality seedlings. You have to know what you're doing, and you got to be able to do that competition control.
Yeah, that's my experience. You got to follow up with those. Otherwise, they get buried in the native vegetation that's out there.
But now we get into high opportunity level practices. So the next one would be site preparation for regeneration. So how would this differ from some of the site prep we've talked about?
Well, it really doesn't. I mean, so site prep's just one of those things of where you've got to get in there and you've got competition you got to control, right? And normally, you don't want to let it go so long that you're doing a liberation cut, right? We do cleanings a little bit, but a lot of it just has to do with controlling. And that's where you do the site assessment up front, right? And we know we're going to have a problem with red bud, or we know we're going to have a problem with, dogwood, or we're going to have a problem with, red maple or whatever. And you treat that with herbicide, so that's a very classic type of, and in there, we're talking mostly herbicide site prep.
Okay. Number 5, I think this one will be new for a lot of people. 2-age deferment cuts.
Yeah. So 2-age deferment cut, and that's one of those that you won't find in the textbook. So what it is, simply, and I'll tell you how it works for white oak and how we found out it would work for white oak. So deferment cut was first article that came out in the Journal of Forestry, and this had to be in the 80s because it came out of the Forest Service guys in West Virginia. And I can't remember if Neil Lamson was and I can't remember who it was right now that was the lead author, but it was viewed as an alternative, a visual or aesthetic alternative to clear cutting, because functionally what you're doing is put a seed tree in hardwoods. That's what it looks like. Okay, so cut everything and leave your 15 square foot of residual overstory, good looking codominant trees. Okay, so it looks very much like a seed tree. All right, that's a 2-age deferment. And why is it called 2-age? Because you're retaining unlike an irregular shelter wood that you may remove that overstory over time. You're keeping that those what's are called reserve trees, you're keeping them into the second to complete a second rotation. So you have two age classes in that stand. These scattered old reserve trees, right, with an understory, if you will, of the new regenerating age class. And like a shelter would, you leave what, 50% of the overstory intact, roughly, right, to provide some shade. This time, it's functioning just like a clear cut. So there's so little residual basal area in those overstory trees that the thing responds like a clear cut, and that's what gives you the two ages. And it was originally thought of as an alternate, as a visual or aesthetic alternative clear cutting, because the public likes that better. Okay. So we started helping our national forest down here implement some of that and do it correctly. And I'm going to tell this on them, but hopefully they'll never hear that. Well, everybody that was involved in this is gone now, but they started doing this deferment cutting, and they were basically doing a commercial clear cut and leaving 20 or 30 square foot of crap standing, right? And they call that a 2-age deferment. And us silviculture looked at it and go, well, that's terrible. So that's just, if you're going to leave trees standing, let's make them good ones. And we started doing a lot of work in how you left trees that were going to stand, that weren't going to wind throw, that weren't going to epicoric branch, all that kind of stuff, right? So, but here's what we found out, and here's where it works for white oak. You can use it as a last resort. Think of it. If you've got a stand that's got overstory's got white oak in it, or any, just pick an oak, right? So it's got oak in the overstory. It has no advanced regeneration or very little, no stump sprouting potential, right? So if you're going to cut that hard, you're going to lose your oak, because the oak reproductive potential is just zero, right? If you leave those reserve trees in oak, what you can do is lifeboat that species in the stand. So those reserve trees are not being left to allow for acorns that are going to somehow magically, be that next age class, right? So you have these reserve trees that are oak. You have an age class coming underneath them that could be whatever. I mean, yellow poplar, beech maple, or something. But by leaving those reserve trees there, you get acorn sexual reproduction the whole time. So you got acorns being generated, right? That the forester down the road is going to have a bigger window to start to work with to build advanced regeneration a rotation age from now. So it's a lifeboat mechanism, okay? When you're going to cut, you're going to make a lot of money off this. The landowner's going to cut no matter what, whether you got any oak regeneration or not. And when we first started working with the system, I didn't realize that until I started walking in these stands, 15 years down after we'd done this, and there's like oak seedlings on the ground. And we're going like, wait a minute, where did that come from? Well, it came from the reserve trees that we left standing. And we started doing some work on that and found out, sure enough, we could use that to do that, if that makes sense to you, right? That's a 2-age deferment harvest.
Number 4, group openings or gap cuts.
So with small landowners, and where you've got 30 acres or 50 acres or 150 acres, right? And you need to get some age classes developed in there just from a sustainability standpoint. Most landowners that we've got, especially the ones that are really, that own the small parcels, clear cutting is not an option, right? But group openings are. And so we're talking about stuff that, acre inside, whatever, where you punch an opening in there, you clean it up pretty good, make a functionally small clear cut, right? And then when you've got those smaller holes, and we've researched, the Forest Service put research in starting in 1960 on looking in the central hardwood region at looking at different size of openings from 1 tree to like 3 acres, right? And so from that data and some of those studies, like we've got one of those studies going on at Robinson Forest that was put in the 60s, where we have different hole sizes. And you start to look at the vegetative response, right? With those holes of different size. And and this is common, we know this, right? So on the edge, it's going to be more shaded, right? And oaks it's going to be a little bit more oaky around the edge because of that, right? You've got the center, if it gets full sunlight all the time, right? So that's going to be your shade intolerance are going to flourish there, and your intermediate shade tolerance around the edge. So you can use these group openings to get you a good species diversity in there. It's a practice. It's a regenerational practice to establish different age classes that some of our small landowners can swallow. Okay, all right. From the standpoint of logging costs, it's not a big deal. If you're taking out 3,000 board foot per acre, whether you're taking out across the stand evenly or in small groups across the stand, doesn't matter from a harvest standpoint, financial standpoint. And what we found out in looking at the data from the studies, like a 50-foot diameter hole in our neck of the woods, you might as well not have done it, right? So you may have got a little shade intolerance started when you did that, but as that hole grows closed and it becomes more shaded, you might as well not done anything. Our 150-foot diameter holes, though, we had more oak component in those holes because we had some, the shade area to the total volume was such that there was more oaky area percentage-wise in a hole like that. And then when you got to, you got your larger holes, an acre in size, acre and a half, you'd still get the oak around the edge, but there's a whole lot of, total sunlight area, right? So the bottom line is you can use group opening as an acceptable tool to most landowners that particularly have smaller acreages. And if you make that hole 150 foot at a minimum, right, you're going to have an environment there that is a part of that environment, that hole anyway, is going to be amenable to oak. Okay, so that's where the use of the group, and it's not group selection, because group selection is nothing but group holes systematically put in, so you got 3 age classes, right? And if you do that, you got group selection going on. We're just talking about punching holes in, right? Okay, and using that as a regenerational tool.
You have, though, and I think I've heard you talk about it, or I've seen things out of Kentucky where you guys have explored using expanding gaps, so putting in gaps and then making those larger over time to see if it would be applicable to oak.
Yeah, and that reason we started that. We published the first paper on that in Canadian Journal of Forest Research, but a couple of years ago. There's some other studies going on now. We've had some other studies like that have started, and we've done some, and they've got some over at the Forest Service and out of the hardwood silviculture upland hardwood project at Bent Creek. They've got some going on as well, and that expanded. And the idea is that when you create that opening, you also modify the light environment in the intact woods right around the opening, right? And we've shown that, you for a certain distance going back, about 100 foot going back, you've modified that, and you can see the response in the advanced regen to that. Okay, and we played around with different things to try to project that. So you can do that, and then when you get that response, then you can expand that gap over time. That's the idea. Now, the real issue is going to be, and any forester out there that's thinking about that for over 3 or 4 seconds. So you have an operational issue, right? So now we're like trying to manage this ring around this opening, and can you do that? And if it involves a harvest, can you get enough volume out there to do it, right? So I think there's some interest in looking at that and continuing to do it. I'm a little bit worried about the applicability of it.
Well, we're down to the last 3, and these are the highest opportunity level practices. So number 3 is shelterwood establishment cuts.
And that's pretty traditional, right? So now you got to know when to use it and what practices you have to use along with it to control the competition, okay? But that's just simple shelterwood. We don't spend a lot of time on the shelterwood and burn, although that can work, right? But you have to do, you have to apply site prep as part of that shelterwood system, and oak can certainly work with that. So now it's figuring out in your, the stand conditions and site conditions, right, that you've got that'll make that shelterwood work. Because you can run a shelterwood and it can backfire on you. I mean, it's so you have to really assess it right. But in practice, in our practices we don't do anything really special with, here's how you do this for white oak, right? Like the group opening size or something, we really don't talk about that. But shelterwood can work to get that modified light environment.
I think your point, Jeff, of kind of the details behind the shelterwood, that's probably important for a lot of these points we're going through. There's a lot of details and specifics to each of these. So people are going to need to, be aware of that.
Yeah, and actually, just to be and it's probably important here as well. You do have in the assessment report and the conservation plan that under shelterwood establishment practices, practices to enhance oak regeneration prior to implementing a shelterwood establishment cut are likely needed. And so I guess that's just part of that assessment. And so it's kind of consistent with what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have the advanced regeneration pool or the sprout potential, so your oak regeneration potential is low, the shelterwood is not going to help you out that much, right? Yep. So what the shelterwood is doing, right, is when your oak regeneration potential is high, you're trying to help yourself a little bit with those competitors, right? That's what you're trying to do.
Yep. So number 2 is crop tree release.
So, and there's nothing special about this, right? I mean, crop tree release has been around forever. You can use it whether it's a sapling pole or make it commercial and all that. And it works for white oak just like it works for everybody else. There's nuances of difference between it and northern red oak, for example. You know, we found out you don't need to release them on all 4 sides like you would a yellow poplar. So yellow poplar it's resource utilization, resource capture, right? It's going to use every bit of sunlight it gets. So you release it on 4 sides of the crown, and it's going to respond to it, right? But what happens is with oak, you have a marginal difference between removing 3 or 4 sides, right? It's only going to respond so much. So there's a little bit of that kind of thing. And in our materials that we've got for foresters, we have some of that. That's the detail that we talk about that's there, right? And unfortunately, white oak likes to epcorn branch, right? So several species do. Unfortunately, white oak's one of them. So we have in there marking guidelines. If you're seeing this kind of defect indicator on the side, you know, on the tree, you know you're going to get a lot of epcorn branching out of it. If you see this kind here, you're not, you know, and so things like that to help with the older stands when you're doing like a commercial, crop tree release. So you've got a small saw timber stand and you're going to let some stay and do that selective cut, you know, logger called selective cut or improvement cut or whatever they want to call it, you know. So we have some of that kind of detailed information with white oak.
I'm really glad to see that one in there because over my career, at least, we haven't spent enough time tending the oaks that we have coming along, and we lose them in places.
Oh yeah, and white oak's one of those because I mean, so we talk about when do you know where it can be real. So when any intermediate practice works, it's when you can change the value. Like, so if you can increase, you know, the percentage of higher valued species in a stand, you want to do it, right? Mm-hmm. All you're doing is producing X amount of volume on the same species, like you would in a row thinning and for pines or something, which is fine to do and you need to do it, right? But where it can really make sense is if you can shift the species composition at an early age.
Right.
So now we're going in sapling size stands, like in a group selection opening, right? You know, or a group opening, whatever. So now you got a 15-year-old and white oak can oftentimes use some help because it can get over top pretty quick, right? So if you get in there, you can adjust that species comp and improve the amount of white oak in there if you jump on it, you know, in that sapling, particularly in that sapling size state. You know, and help your white oak on a higher quality site. See, that's what you're doing. You know, that's where it really comes. It's useful when you've got a higher quality site and you know, your white oak's just not going to be able to maintain a dominant canopy position. But the crop tree release can help you do that.
And here we come to it. The number 1 suggested upland and white oak management practice is mid-story removal.
And so, I mean, that's just like we talked about before. So that's trying to help us with the mesification issue, right? So we've got such a buildup of leaf area close to the ground due to the invasion, if you will, or the proliferation of your shade tolerant species in there. And that's what's stopping the recruiting. We probably a number of your foresters are familiar with what's called the oak bottleneck, where you'll get stands where you get a bumper crop of acorns, you'll get a bunch of foot tall seedlings, you know, and they'll sit there in this dense shade, and over 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years, they'll all die off. And then you have another bumper crop, and here you go again, right? And it does that like forever. And that's called the oak bottleneck because you can't get those seedlings up in size. You can't get them 2 foot, 4 foot, 6 foot in size. And the mid-story removal takes that competition and shade out of there, right? So it allows a natural regeneration process to occur, just as it would have back in the 1800s when we had removed all the mid-story and killed the mesification, right? And that's why we feel like it's a pretty legitimate practice to become familiar with and start to use. And that works for any upland oak. Well, it works for any bottomland oak. It works for any oak that's intermediate shade tolerant, right?
So Jeff, is it important to, you talked about the oak bottleneck, is it important to kind of monitor, say, those seed crops and those germinants? And when you got that population of germinants, that would be the time to give them more sunlight and do that mid-story removal?
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is do the mid-story removal with no oak advanced regeneration present, right? Because other stuff's good. I mean, here's the problem with that practice is if you've got, and I'll just use my territory as an example of and talk about red maple, but replace your shade tolerant competitor with that. So red maple, when you go to clear that out, you've got 1 foot tall red maple in there too. And when you give it more light, guess what? It's going to like it. Okay. And so you do have to assess it. You got to be smart when you're going to use it. You have to get some seedlings established before you do. Okay. Because if you don't, you're wasting money. And we had some problems with that because you know how it is. Then the foresters can relate to this, right? So they get landowners that hear about something, go to a meeting, and hear somebody talk about something and they want to do it, right? They want to do it whether it's right, wrong, doesn't matter. We're going to do a mid-story removal. No, you can't because there's no baby oak seedlings there, right? So we had a little bit of that problem going on for a while where people were hip on using it in situations where the stand wasn't ready.
Yeah.
So you're correct. Assess your regeneration, assess your acorn crop that's coming, right? And time it to where you're improving the light regime for the oaks.
We kind of circle back to this is all a process, and you got to be kind of working with it over time.
Yeah, you sure do. And yeah, it's a suite of, so this the whole oak management thing is a series of silviculture practices that you got to put together to make it work. Unfortunately,
Yeah, in our world, Greg, I could see combining. So number 10 was fire, but number 1, I could combine the mid-story and the fire, and that might actually buy you a little more time. But like you were saying, Jeff, certain people aren't going to be able to do the fire, or at least not as easily.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the Ozarks, you can use it. It's a little bit different there, but they use it to reset the stand, right? So they'll go in there and do the fire to basically reset the thing down to the ground, right? And if you're on a little bit lower site quality to start with, and you don't have as many competitors, see, that alone can allow the oak to flourish, right? So they figured out how to use that based on the stand situation they've got. And you're in the lake state stuff, you're going to have to, you got to figure this stuff out, and how to combine these practices in a way that, they make sense for what you're trying to do.
So Jeff, looking forward with the White Oak Initiative, what do you see coming down the pike? What's next with all of that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think there is still a lot of interest in it. It's pretty new. There's a lot of interest in it. I think we're going to see a maintenance of contributions coming into it, and and interest from our stakeholders in it. I think right now the big thing is, so we're developing all these training tools. Like we got an app that's coming, for landowners to be able to do a little bit. Don't panic, foresters. Do a little bit of self-assessment. Take some pictures of your forest, and it'll educate landowners a little bit about what it takes to grow white oak, right? And you link that to a website, it's got publication. But ultimately, in the end, what it will tell them is that, hey, you need to be thinking in this direction, and you got to have a professional forester to help you be able to do this, this, and this, right? And go get your professional forester, and we'll have a mechanism in there for them to get a hold of their state forester, okay, and for assistance. And that we've got another portal in that app for professionals that helps them with some of this prescription stuff. So the bottom line is we're finishing up our logger education materials. So all this education stuff we're doing now, but the real issue is how many acres are we going to be able to impact? Right. So now we're concerned about how do we track progress? And you know, guys, ultimately we do that from the standpoint of we FIA data, but it's going to take, I mean, what, like 15, 20 years for this kind of stuff to show up in FIA data, you know? So now we're worried about how do we track progress? How do we know we're making progress in quote unquote change in behavior, right? In getting more of these practices done. There are ways to track it, but we're trying to figure that out now. How are easy ways to track it? You know, you can do it looking at equip money and the practices that the equip money go for, right? But see, even then, it's hard to tell what's white oak and what's not, right? Okay. So right now we're trying to figure out a way to be able to, like I said, to track management change and the change in management practices, right? So that we can show that, hey, all of this effort, right, is amounting to something. So that's the challenge now as to how to, we can figure out the educational tools, we can do all that kind of stuff, but getting the practice change on the ground is a big one. And that's why we want to know there's got enough equip money there. So here's the question like the distillers ask is, do you guys have enough money to do forest practice, right? And do you have enough, what are the markets? So that's why I keep telling them, you got to have markets. Now, nobody's going to put in a new pulp mill, but do you have scrag mills and stuff? Do you have markets for your low quality stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And do your foresters know what they're doing? Yeah. So, we're working on all that, and to try to push this thing forward. So what are the roadblocks? Yeah. Right. And the White Oak Initiative is trying to define those, and then build solutions.
Well, one thing that Brad and I talk about often is just how to scale things up. We look at trying to solve certain problems, and I just want to thank you, Jeff, for shining the spotlight on this issue and finding a way to scale it up. Like, yeah, we're gonna have to monitor long term, but there's a lot of collaborators, as we talked about, working on this, and so it's a great project. Yep.
Well, and the bad part about it is all of us, any field forester out there, hates paperwork and reporting, right? So it's an uphill battle. Anyway, and I get it. Trust me, I do.
So if foresters want to get more information on this, where should they go?
So, White Oak, the whiteoakinitiative.org is a good place under resources. We've got the nice thing about that is, so we've got 13 landowner for oaks pubs there right now. So there's 3 of them there that, like, how do you grow white oak, right? Well, why are upland oaks? So all those publications are upland oaks with a white oak focus, right? So we're not ignoring chestnut oak, we're not ignoring northern red, right? But there's 3 publications in there that I think would be good if you had landowners that were interested, right, and learning a little bit more about oak, or you were trying to get them to move in that direction. Those publications we go. We've got 3 of them that talk about, why is white oak important? How does white oak work biologically? How do we grow it and those kind of things? And then an introduction to all those 10 practices. Okay. The other publications are how to identify oak, and we put, we've got white oak in there, and then 8 other, co-occurring upland oaks in there, so they know how to identify stuff.
Thank you very much. There's a ton of information here, and it was great, like, going through this with you, and really great to see you again, Jeff. I know folks will get a lot out of this conversation.
Well, it's like you probably say this, or you should say it every time, especially when you're dealing with technical stuff. And I tell everybody, I may have to change these percentages over time, although I'm getting pretty old in the tooth now. 87% of everything I told you is right. 13's wrong. You figure it out. Right?
I'll have to remember that one. Well, thanks again, Jeff, and take care. And I'm sure we'll be running into you.
Well, I appreciate the time and enjoyed having the conversation. And it's forestry is one of those things. And you've probably heard this before. It's not rocket science. It's a lot more complicated. And I do think dealing with the mixed species stands that we have, right, and the number of species that we have in our stands, Silviculture is not an easy thing. It's really not. And we shouldn't shy away from it, but we all got to be on our A game.
Yep. Well said.
Thank you.
That music can only mean it's time for the Dropbox. The Dropbox is a regular segment where we take your comments, questions, tips, whatever you share with us, and share them with our listeners.
Brad, Jason in Bayfield sent in a really good topic idea: aesthetic modification to silvicultural practices. I know that most foresters bump into this issue probably often, and it can play a really critical role in how the public sees forest management. But I'm not sure where to go with this one. I'd like to know, what is the state of the art or the science behind this issue?
I think this is one where our listeners might be even able to help us identify people to discuss this with, because
That's what I was hoping.
yeah, because to tell you the truth, I'm not familiar with a lot of the research on this. I know people who deal with it, but they deal with it on a very irregular basis, not on a professional basis, on a day-to-day basis, thinking about these things. So it's a cool topic, though, and I know there are lots of situations where we're always doing little things to make it more palatable, or to do something to make it more aesthetically pleasing. That, I don't know, I hope there's a lot out there about it.
So if anybody has any ideas on a really good guest that could speak to these issues, send us a line in the Dropbox. We'd appreciate it.
And we now have, if you send us, Greg, we could send somebody something for this, right?
Oh yeah, we do have
we have swag,
special gifts.
We have swag, and
very special.
Yeah. So just let us know, and let us know how many people you're drinking with too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. If you didn't hand them all out at the SAF convention.
Yeah. Nope. No more. Thanks for listening to today's episode of SilviCast. If you have ideas for future episodes or a question for the Dropbox, please let us know. You can reach us at UW Stevens Point's Wisconsin Forestry Center by emailing wfc@uwsp.edu. Feel free to include a sound file of your question or a comment if you like. We learn best when we wrestle with questions, so keep them coming.
And take care, everyone. And as always, thanks to our team: Susan Barrett, our editor-in-chief; Logan Koseha, our IT master; theme music by Paul Frater; and of course, UW Stevens Point's Wisconsin Forestry Center.